Hello. I wanted to give you all an update on what's going on and why I'm being so quiet. It's been a very busy year, but particularly the last couple of months have been very busy for me. And so I've not been doing my lives in the same way as before. Since COVID, when I started doing the lives, obviously that was a very different period of time. There was a lot more time for me and space for me to explore talking and interacting with you online in this live way, but also creating content in other ways too. Unfortunately, um, the things have changed since then, and so I've just simply not had the same capacity or time or been available even over weekends in the same way as I was before. And so I haven't been able to be around in the same way as before, and I've missed talking to you all. I enjoyed very much having these sessions, and I just want to set some expectations, I guess. So, um, really, it was around organising the language event, which happened in Edinburgh at the end of last month. And then since then, it's kind of been a whirlwind of lots of things that I've had to do. We had bank holiday weekends and things all through May, and now it's kind of the end of school year, and there's a lot going on. So I may well look at coming back to do some more lives in the summer. I have also had an awful lot of work on trying to figure out the Polyglot conference. It's been a lot of work this year. Usually it's way simpler than it's been normally. And this year has, I think, in big part due to the pandemic, but also because of Russia, Ukraine, we've experienced a lot of changes in the world, and a lot of things have just been playing out a lot differently than normal. And so this has affected the cost of things, organizing things, prices generally for lots of us around the world. And so, as you can imagine, organizing things has been a little bit tougher than normal. And so I am doing my very best to see what I can do, and also to recognize the struggles of the people in the language learning community, the same struggles that many of us go through for adapting to these new prices and not necessarily having the same increase in income as the increase in prices that we see in shops or in bills and all these other places that we kind of have to uh, where we have to pay to exist and to be. And so all of these things have kind of gone into a pot, and I've had to think about them. And on top of these things, I've also been doing my best to kind of get into the swing of things for my Cornish grade 3 exam, which will be coming up at the end of this month, early next month, and again at the end of next month. So I've got that to prepare for properly. I want to make sure that I get through the exam. I've already bought my course books for the 4th grade, and it looks very exciting. And so it kind of brings me onto something with all of these things and these updates. It does bring me onto something I think that's important to note when it comes to language learning. And I talk to people in the language learning therapy sessions that I hold about this. And they're often, they need to be tweaked and adapted, these kinds of conversations, for individual needs. And what I've noticed is that sometimes we have to just accept reality and what that reality means for us, what we can realistically do, and what we want. And sometimes what we want is not realistic. Sometimes what we think we're doing is also not realistic, or what we think we should be doing is not realistic. What do I mean by that? I mean that sometimes we set these expectations against ourselves. And I say against ourselves because I think that what we do is we use a measuring stick that is often inaccurate for measuring what's achievable, doable, and realistic for us to maintain a healthy lifestyle and to maintain our physical and mental well-being. And we will do that and go against, possibly, if we thought about it, even better judgment, and make those decisions and then not get what we expected at the end. And it turns into this sort of cycle, which I think is not necessarily healthy for us. And so when it comes to what we put in and what we expect out, there are a couple of fundamental things that I've discovered over the years. One is the intensity at which we put things into the pot. That is to say, whether it's learning languages or learning anything or doing almost anything, really. But a lot of things you could apply this to, but particularly languages, which is my sphere of interest. If you don't keep up that intensity over the longer term, where you don't have a way for it to become part of your life in that type of level of intensity, clearly there's going to be a degradation of the outcome that you notice in the beginning. So you may have, say, 1, 2, 3 months of really strong input because you're doing something in a really intensive manner, and you may get this great result straight away. You appear to speak the language within a matter of months. But once that goes away and other things happen, this level of intensity goes down, but also you will notice that this ability that we assumed that was just with us then also shrinks back. And that's normal. The key trick is to find that equilibrium between putting something in that's realistic over a long period of time and getting something out that is achievable and it can grow to a point where it requires very little maintenance. So Luca Lampariello always talks about these, 30-minute chunks and things like that. And the reason he does this is because it's a more manageable sounding amount of time, and it is usually a more manageable amount of time. And Luca's a good language learner, so why not? If you can manage that, it's a wonderful thing, and it can become something that's very manageable. Once you get your language to a certain level, you can then realistically tune into radio stations, TV stations, watch films, read books, all these kinds of things that are fun and not necessarily seen as language learning. And this is the key. It's incorporating the learning into life. And then once you've got to that magic mark or the magic point in your studies or knowledge of a language that it just becomes part of your life, that's where the sort of that sweet spot hits. And when we're not there and we're not getting these results, we need to also look at what else is going on, what else is happening. Do we need time to get back to it? Do we need to refocus? Do we need to focus on other things for a period of time? And none of these things inherently are a problem as long as we make that agreement with ourselves. And this is something that, after having done lives for the whole of the pandemic, pretty much on a regular basis, for a month of my life, I've had to reassess, do I have that time and capacity and that space to do that with the other things that I had going on, and also meet those goals? And somewhere, sometimes, something has to give. But that doesn't mean I have given up on these lives because I enjoy them, and I enjoy the interaction with you, and I enjoy reading your comments, and I enjoy when you join the lives and you say hello and you greet me and you ask me questions. And although I hadn't planned on doing a live right now, I did want to give this update. I did want to check in with you, and I did want to let you know that things are just busy. Sometimes it happens. That's life, unfortunately. We have to acknowledge where our limitations are, where we can't always do everything and be everything for everyone. And I hope that this was a useful discussion to come and to be very honest with you and open with you about my reality. And I hope that it strikes a chord that means that you can also identify with it and see how it fits into your reality as well. Because I can guarantee that I'm not the only one, just as you're not the only ones to face certain issues. There's always some parallel or some inspiration or something that we can draw from other people. And I constantly find sources of inspiration and people who help me to realize things or think of things. And they're not necessarily the same as me or in the same situation as me or with the same lived experiences I've got or even with the same background or identities that I have. But I can still listen to them and imagine what that might look like in my reality. So, yeah. Thank you. Good afternoon. Sorry, I didn't say hello in the beginning to everyone, the people writing. So nice to see you. I'm glad you enjoy it too, and you understand. Thank you to Smith. That's really nice. Yeah, and I mean, as I say, I've not gone anywhere. I just so I mean, I am still. I've been putting a few things on Twitter, but I've not really done. And I did a live for the Eurovision on on TikTok yesterday with somebody, but I've not been really on much of any social media apart from sort of private Facebook, where I just take pictures of cats and flowers and things that I enjoy that I find relaxing and enjoyable, and I like to try and capture moments. And I'm very much I live in the moment. I love enjoying things for when they're happening and when they're around, and I like to enjoy, yeah, the very small sort of pleasures in life. For me, that's the real beauty of living and being on this planet. Christian, I can totally relate to this. Really enjoy your lives. Thank you. They're always very thought-provoking. Absolutely understand how busy it can get. Thank you, Christian. I appreciate it. Timothy, kıskanım ben seversen. Certain live. Thank you. It's nice to see you too, Tim. And you know, there's something quite special about interacting with other people in this way, because you get to really feel that you're part of something more. And I think, as I say, I do take pleasure in the very small things that go on in my life, and try to enjoy them for what they are. So the first sip of a cup of coffee, if I really like that coffee, I really like things like, you know, if I find the touch of something quite nice, say for example a fabric or something like that, just to enjoy that for the moment that I touch it. And yeah, a bit like the Amélie, you know, the Amélie Poulain, Le Fabuleux Destin d'Amélie Poulain, the film where she puts her hand in the bag of, I want to say lentils or something, at the market, and she just enjoys the feel of the lentils on her hand, and it's one of her pleasures. And yeah, that kind of innocent pleasure of certain things, or the smell of cut grass, or these are the kinds of things that I really enjoy. And yeah, I'm a very simple person. But likewise, in when it comes to languages, I also enjoy things like seeing a word and understanding its etymology and where it's from, and seeing a new link. And these are the things that kind of bring me to life. And so even in the language world, I hear things and I'm like, you know, I'd not put things together before, or somebody else put things together and showed me them in a different way. And some of these sessions that I run, we share things like this, and they're super, super exciting to hear about, and I absolutely find them fascinating. Yeah, and I watch some people who create these things about etymology, particularly online, and I absolutely adore listening to them, because there's always something you can learn, right? There's always a learning experience in most things. Здорово, что ты столько делаешь для нас. Для нас. Спасибо, Timothy. Пожалуйста. I really appreciate it. Yeah, I hope that I can add some value in some way, and if I can, I'm very happy. And I always find that I get to hopefully learn something as well along the way each time, to try and kind of improve my awareness and ability and knowledge, and not just of languages but also of the people. And for me, it's not just the languages, it's also the people in communities that speak the languages and use the languages as a vehicle of their cultures and their essence, who they are. And this is kind of the real beauty in language learning for me. And I get to experience that, which I think is wonderful. The Amelie likes to crack the creme brulee together. Yeah, I like that too. I love that sound on the creme brulee, that when you crack the sort of the burnt sugary bit on the top. It's so nice. I absolutely completely get Amelie. She when I saw that film, I was like, wow, it's like it's exactly what was going on in my head when I first saw it. Bună ziua, Tiffany, nice to see you. So yeah, I hope that creating this video was at least useful to shed some light on what's going on. You know, I've had to really rethink some of the things that I could commit to and not commit to, and it's been a tricky month and a bit. I'd say particularly the last month and a bit has been particularly tricky because of so many things going on. But it has been, to be fair, a fairly busy year. So yeah, and I appreciate you coming. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for supporting me. If you know, if you obviously want to reach out, you know how to reach out to me. If you're not sure, the links are all in the other videos. I haven't put one in this yet because this was kind of an ad hoc. Let's have a chat. Let me update you on some things. I should really go back now and start studying for. I want to prepare my oral presentation for Cornish, and I have the choice of two topics. So one is on modern and older industries in Cornwall. That's the one topic you can choose to sort of compare and contrast, and then decide what you want. The other topic that I think I'm going to go for is about the education and curriculum of Cornish language in Cornish schools. And so yeah, I quite like that idea because it's kind of in my sphere of interest, and also yeah, as a topic, it raises a lot of questions for me as somebody who's very much into and wants to promote Indigenous, endangered and vulnerable language education and study. That there are lots of paths to navigate when it comes to that question, and there are lots of interesting examples in the world of how that's been done to different degrees and how that's worked out. And so, you know, there's a lot of sort of cultural stuff to overcome, a lot of learnt behavior and ideas and thoughts and prejudices to also overcome. And yeah, so I've got quite a lot of top things that I'd like to say on that topic. And then yeah, and then also I've also got a few other things that I need to figure out as well for next week. I'm going on a trip, and yeah, I will tell you more about that trip soon, I hope. But it's going to be another language-related interesting trip, and I will tell you more as soon as I can. For right now, though, I don't think I can say much more than that. It's always quite an interesting thing to sort of be involved in different projects and things and pieces, particularly as well. But I never imagined would be possible. And had you asked me a number of years ago, I wouldn't have imagined it either. But yeah, the world has changed a lot, and from when I was younger, beyond recognition. And yeah, so I'm still navigating some of these things and doing my best to sort of find a good way through. And I hope that in sharing these trials and tribulations and all this, it sort of helps to make new contacts and to learn more from more people. I always find it amazing how much people have got to talk about certain things that I wouldn't always imagine they had knowledge of or experience of, but until you open up a topic sometimes with people, you don't, and especially if you do it in a kind of an open way, like with no judgment way, it can be quite interesting to hear what comes out. Sometimes you get some very different things out. So that's one of the reasons also on Twitter. And even for these, sometimes I will ask very open questions and I won't give my stance away or my thoughts or anything. I like to leave things open because sometimes I get very interesting comments or thoughts or experiences just by leaving things open. And sometimes when you do that as well, I mean, to not lead somebody into a way of thinking or a specific sort of, to sort of box them in before they need to be boxed in, if you know what I mean. You kind of want to see what's really expanding, right? So yeah, that's kind of where I am. And I do that generally. I like to sort of try and understand what people are thinking before I don't want to sort of impose what I'm thinking. I prefer to hear their sort of thoughts and then talk through things and sort of see where things could mesh and meet and be a learning opportunity for me too. And then if they want to ask questions and think as well, obviously, I'm not usually in there for telling people what to do. I think that you can share. My kind of philosophy in life is I can share my thoughts, my experiences, and my perceived learnings or what I think that I've learned. They may or may not apply to the next person. They may or may not be something that they gel with, and that's fine. In fact, I find it quite interesting that sometimes I will have a conversation with somebody and their conclusion is not the same as my conclusion, but I can follow their logic and I can respect why they have a different opinion. And unless we have those discussions with people who are different, we don't even get the chance to understand if there's a logic that even if you don't in conclusion agree with or are completely on board with, you can at least follow the reasoning and respect that there's a different outcome. And I think that's kind of the nice thing that I like in this community. Yeah, because you get this in a really big way, I think, in a community like that's multinational, multi-ethnic, multi-religious, multi-everything. And yeah, every individual's reality is going to be different as well. So anyway, I got a bit philosophical at the end here, but let me see. I see there are a couple of other questions. Let me see. One question. Okay. Let me see. Sorry. One question. When you go to language courses, do the teachers ever give you any examples of successful language learners, like case studies to emulate? None of my teachers ever did. Yes, they did actually, Timothy. It's a really good question, and I found it particularly useful. So when I was in sixth form college in the UK, which is when we do our A levels between 16 and 18, you had to write we had to write on certain topics for the exam. So it might be on politics, it could have been on the economy, it could have been on at that time as well. A lot of topics were about the Eurotunnel being built. This is how old I am. The Eurotunnel being built, and there was a big debate on at that time whether or not any animals could get over to the United Kingdom with rabies, because rabies had been eradicated from the United Kingdom, but it still existed in France, and was that a danger? And these are kind of the debates that were going on. And what the teachers did for French, Spanish, and German is they had folders of sample essays that had been written by students that had done particularly well in argument, in sort of putting the arguments together and using the language in a solid way. And they used to put them in a folder just in the common area for all of the language students to be able to dip in, look at, use, and then obviously they couldn't regurgitate it, but they could get inspiration from it. And I thought that was a really good idea. It was good for the kids that I think did really well with it, because it actually was a nice way of saying, like, you're that good, we're giving you as an example. This piece of work you did as an example of how to write this. But also it inspired other people to see what they were doing well. And so I thought that was a really positive thing to do. Oh, that's nice, Tiffany. So Tiffany said that she likes the meetings that we have because the ideas from others. I really like that too. Hey, what's up, T? Hello, Richard. Is there a well-practiced way of studying a language without burning out? Probably, if it is better to make regular pauses in the process of or journey, or is it to be consumed in moderation? So Abdullah, Abdullayev, sorry, I'm sorry, I'm. Let me just read your name properly because it's gone up a little bit. There we go. Islambek, is that right? Islambek. It is. It's important actually on an individual level to find what's right for you in your life. That's the important thing. It's not as easy as just giving a blanket answer. It depends on you. It's sort of finding your reality and what you're happy with and what works for you and what you can make peace with, in terms of, if you do this, then the outcome is likely to be that. And is that what you want, or is it not? If it isn't, how do we adjust what you're doing to make it something you want and you'll be happy with? And then trying those different methods and different ways of combining things and stuff. And that's kind of where the magic happens. But it does include a lot of the things that you've mentioned, for sure. Timothy, you should have your own chat show because you ask very good questions and to let people open up. Thank you, Timothy. Thank you. I do enjoy talking to people. I actually genuinely enjoy hearing different views. Yeah, sometimes things, I think this is the thing as well. Unfortunately, in sort of today's society, particularly, and when you think of social media and stuff, I hear very much of like we block people we don't agree with, and we just listen to our own opinions. And the thing is that potentially that can be good and bad. It can be good if it's if we notice that our mental health is suffering because of it, and we're getting into arguments. But it can be bad sometimes in that it limits your ability to understand another side of an argument or a position or experience. And so when we can understand what other people are seeing, thinking, feeling, or believing, it can help us to better understand what then comes out of that viewpoint. Whereas I think sometimes what people will often do, and I see this a lot online, is particularly around Brexit. Brexit was a huge flashpoint for a lot of people, was arguing with points that hadn't necessarily been made, or second guessing the points that had been made or not made, and people's reasoning. And I think that I think it can be a sad way of doing it, because if we understand some valid points that people make, it can help have a more open conversation. And also, like, I mean, people tend to, but tend to follow a certain logical path. And so when you can understand the logical path of thinking that somebody has, And just because that their outcome or their conclusion is different, it doesn't mean that there's not some sort of path there that they're following and some influences or inputs that they're getting that can be potentially questioned or we can talk about and see. But I think just sort of going for the very end of I'm going to change your opinion or your mind or whatever, maybe just naive at best as just an starting at that point from an end outcome almost. Because if we don't understand why people are saying certain things, sometimes it's difficult. I'm not going to say that I'm not going to be naive either and say that that's always the way. I have watched enough interviews to to realize that sometimes people just will be switched off, but sometimes people will be switched off because they have preconceptions themselves of the person they're talking to, and that they maybe have an opinion of them or their thoughts or their ideas. And this is where I find, for me personally, I tend not to draw those conclusions so quickly. I like to listen and see, because if I don't do that, and for example, I could even for, like, let's take cultural norms, right? For example, you could watch the actions of somebody on a bus, and they could. So you'll get one group of people will open all of the windows on the bus to let in fresh air. And then you've got another group of people who would close all the windows on a bus because they believe that the draft is actually making their neck stiff and will cause them to feel sick later. And which group is right? But if we don't understand the reasons why they're doing it and they just take the actions, they could actually come to blows over just the opening and shutting of the windows. What kind of things would people be arguing about in that situation? Well, I can guarantee that they're not going to be asking the cultural reasons and norms as to why these people want the windows closed and these people want the windows open. They will more likely just fight on the end action or the end thought process, which is I need to open the windows, I need to close the windows, whichever way around it is. And they'll just come to blows. And they will both go away thinking that the other party is stupid or uneducated or ridiculous or whatever. And that's kind of, there's no conclusion there, right? It comes to blows. And you can kind of extrapolate that to a lot of different things as well, to understand where people are coming from, how things affect them, what their social norms are, what they've heard. You know, if you come to somebody with a very new idea from a different culture, and you just explain it as that, and that's it. If that's the first time they've ever heard that, well, there's also a desensitization process that has to take place as well. Sometimes with people, we can't just say expect somebody to accept something that's extremely different. And this is where I think languages and cultures are extremely well linked, and also it's super important that we get where people are coming from, and we listen to them, and we take the time to try and understand, even if the conclusion that they have at the moment is not something that's even within our sphere of acceptance. Usually within our own culture, it could be something that is absolutely outrageous for us as a conclusion. But that's what happens when you learn a language and you go to a different country. I mean, you know, we don't people in different places, even within countries, but people do not look at the same world with the same lens. I mean, pretending that this is particularly one of my kind of gripes about the West is we will often in Western countries or Western spheres, particularly the US, the UK, and others, will very often take the lens of our society and try and put that on every single place in the world. And of course, we can't, because and that would even be in the bid of like being open, or and I've seen this argued in both ways, right? Sort of, we should do this, whether it's whichever side of a divide you see this as being. I've seen it done from both sides of whether they're Republican, Democrat, whether they're right, left, whatever they are. I've seen this done from both sides, and yeah, the expectation is to basically see the world as they see it, and or see the world through the lens of their social norms, and it doesn't work because they're not the same country, they're not the same cultures, they're not the same groups of people, they don't view the world in the same way, they don't view their society in the same way, they don't have the same experience with the same types of people. So it's all very, very different. And so I think that this is why language and culture need to we need to also understand this when we're entering into these different spheres, and understanding where things are coming from. I think is it's kind of a really good first step to start to kind of see a different lens and see how it could work differently. That was very deep as well. Anyway, Harwich, I'm currently learning Slovak and will spend my summer in Bratislava. Very nice. Do you think I can use this language to communicate with people of Czech Republic? Or should I learn also Czech? You actually, as a foreigner, when we learn a language like Slovak or Czech, it's amazing how much more flexibility we sometimes have than monolingual speakers to kind of flex the language to accept other sounds or other sort of ways of pronouncing or even slightly different grammar. I feel that sometimes it can actually work to our advantage. Typically, Czech people, you're speaking in Slovak. I mean, Slovak is still a language that's accepted as a language to write your thesis in at university in Czech Republic. First of all, just to sort of highlight the sort of the difference. You can still write in Slovak and finish university without writing Czech. Do you hear Slovak in Czech Republic? A lot of Slovaks tend to learn Czech. The other way around, possibly less. Czechs learning Slovak. So Slovaks tend to understand Czech more readily than Czechs Slovak. But still, look, unless you get to a word that's very, very specific, like, I don't know, a word like blueberries or something, which I think is quite different in Slovak. I can't remember the word now, but I think that's one of the ones that is quite different. You're not really going to have huge communication barriers. I mean, so you can try using Slovak if you want to learn Czech. If you've studied Slovak, you're talking about learning the differences between the two languages, and so you shouldn't have a huge issue with it. My honest advice to you would be to focus on your Slovak. If you've got this opportunity to spend time in Bratislava and to focus on it, mixing it now with Czech might just diversify what you're trying to do and not allow for the same level of intensity to actually just practice your Slovak. And believe me, I don't think you're going to gain very much from doing Czech right now as you would, for example, if you just focused on Slovak, practice that a lot, and then you could potentially look at the differences in Czech. That's kind of the way I would take it. I didn't learn Slovak when I was in Czech Republic. Been to Slovakia many times, spoken Czech, and it was usually fine. I did try and learn Slovak at one point for Polyglot Gathering. We had had this thing that we competition, and I did it for a few weeks. But what happened was my Slovak went back into my Czech and Polish. It didn't remain as a separate language in my head. Yeah, I hope that helps. And good luck, Bruno, with that. It'll be very exciting. I like Bratislava a lot. When you learn a different language, you learn about different tenses used for interpreting. Yeah. Different lenses for interpreting. Yes, exactly. Absolutely, Eric. You do. I think this is an important thing. You know, the language is the vehicle of the culture and the history and the people and how they think and how they feel and what they see and perceive. And you get lots of signposts in the language when you're learning it to see how they feel about certain things. Things that are tied to idioms, things that are tied to turns of phrase that they use, words that are related and not related in one language and another. It's extremely interesting to see how all of this plays out. Hi Richard, do you calculate your study hours when you're studying? No, I feel like this is important. So when you take time off and get back to the language, you know where you left off. No, I don't, not at this stage. Although, for example, with Cornish, I could tell you that I have 4 hours a week at least of Cornish, and then possibly a bit more on my own that I study. But there, I know the 4 hours for sure because I go to classes and go to conversation groups. So usually 4 hours, but I'll be a little bit more if I do a bit of extra reading as well. But I don't do that because I've always been in kind of either education or a very specific environment where I've been learning languages. So I didn't really need to think about how much I was doing it. And nowadays I don't, because I either use the language or I don't use the language. And if I do use the language because it's part of what I need, then great. And if I don't use the language, then I accept that the language will get a bit rusty. I may need to brush up on it. It is, yeah, for me, it's not the end of the world. But absolutely, I mean, if you know, for example, that for some people, it will be more important to follow that more rigorously and to see where you're up to with the language. And I think I understand that and accept that. I think the key thing is if our goal is to actually keep learning, we need to do something. We can't just expect it to go in by osmosis. So potentially to that end, it might be quite useful to do that. I've just got to a point now where I do language projects for a few months, and okay, the Celtic languages have been a few years now, but generally speaking, yeah, they're very sort of, I do these days where I study them and it just kind of happens. And then if I do extra, great, and if I don't, I'm taking it slowly, so I don't worry too much. Yeah. Sebastian, hi Richard, is it a good idea to write out a dialogue or short text by hand in order to learn a new language? It can be quite useful to do that, Sebastian, because there's something about muscle memory sometimes and the feeling of getting something done. So if, for example, you, like me sometimes, you might be able to, it might be, I don't know, you can sometimes get bored just reading it or listening to it. And sometimes when we write things out, I sometimes get the feeling that, oh, I can see what I've done. I can feel an achievement in doing it. So yeah, that absolutely is something that can be useful. What I will say is that I tend to throw that material away into the recycling bin afterwards, after a while, because otherwise it just piles up and I feel that I should know it and I don't know it. So I don't want that extra stress or burden. And so I prefer not to have it anymore. But the process of doing it is quite useful. Let's see. Slovaks don't actually learn Czech, but a lot of their TV and films are in Czech, so they usually speak better Czech than Czechs do Slovak. Absolutely, yeah. They also have a lot of books as well. So if you go to the bookshop in Bratislava, you'll see entire sections that have got Czech literature, for example, things that have just been left in Czech. And this is something that I think with Slovakia, it seems that it's just been kind of accepted that Slovaks will understand Czech more than Czechs understand Slovak. I do think, though, with the most recent generations, that this is lessening now, that you're seeing fewer younger children who will understand Czech as well as the older generations, because they don't remember Czechoslovakia, they don't remember the times before the EU, and so as is natural for countries that split, and then also they will naturally have a distancing from a neighboring country in a way, even though it's quite a friendly neighbor. The Czech and Slovak friendship, I think, is quite good and quite healthy. But even so, each of these countries is going to be going on its own path, and so there's a natural dividing of things over a longer period of time, and an evolution of both languages in slightly different directions. So this will lessen over time, this ability to understand each other in the same way. It'll take a while. It won't be in my lifetime that we'll get to that point, but you can definitely see and feel that this is happening, not just in Czech Republic and Slovakia, but also in other parts of the world, like here in the Balkans, you can absolutely feel that some people have a harder time understanding or actively producing, say, Serbian or Croatian or whatever from Macedonian, for example. We often hear people are less able to speak fluently in the same way as, say, the previous generations. It would depend also on a house by house basis, but and what they watched on TV as kids. But there's definitely a move towards more people speaking English, say, for example, and then speaking English together. I don't know if it's got to that point in Czech Republic and Slovakia in the same way, but I have heard those kinds of things happening in other parts of the world. So yeah, super interesting, these things. Like language development and language evolution is, for me, a very interesting talking point, because it gets mixed in with the whole language dialect debate. And obviously, very sort of potentially triggering for a lot of people. Understandably, there are lots of history, lots of feelings mixed in with it, and not all of it obviously positive. So it's always an interesting topic for discussion. And I think whenever I enter into a conversation with these types of topics, I like to hear the point of view of the person who's actually got the experience. Vladimir Skulteti says that he thinks that Slovak and Czech are the same. I mean, I'm going to leave that to, if Vlad said that, I'll leave that to him. It's not something I would feel comfortable saying. I think that people have got different views on these things. I hear similar things about Galician and Portuguese, and there are people who feel one way and another in these language communities, and look, that's for the language community to decide, not for me as an outsider. Serbo-Croatian is also in my roadmap of language, just to learn. Okay, which one do you suggest I begin with? Serbian, Croatian, Bosnian, or does it not matter? I would probably go with, in terms of like for just materials and ease within the EU, probably Croatian. Depends on what you're going to use it for later, but within EU organizations, obviously it's an official language now. Also, it's written in the Latin script, so in terms of ease of access, depending on what your ability in Cyrillic is like, it's going to be fairly straightforward. Croatian grammar is more similar to the Slovak and Czech way of building sentences than Serbian. Serbian tends more towards the other two Southeast Slavic languages and others in that group. So I would probably go with Croatian, but Bosnian, I think, it's a bit more complicated. That's a more complicated discussion for a number of reasons. But I mean, does it matter? Well, kind of. If you're going to a place, a country, and you've learnt the words and the way people speak in from the neighbouring country, it's going to seem a bit odd. But so I would pick one. I mean, look, if you learn Croatian, it's not like you can't understand people in Bosnia or Serbia at all. They'll have different words for certain things, and the grammar will be slightly different. I mean, so just to give you an idea of the grammar, for example, in Croatian, you tend to say a verb, a conjugated verb, and then you would use an infinitive form. And in Serbian, the tendency would be conjugated form plus conjugated form. So, for example, I want that I do, or I want to do, that kind of difference. And yeah, getting used to that and how to use it properly. It doesn't mean that both forms don't exist in both languages, but there's a more of a tendency, and also the pronunciation of them as well is going to be different, and word choice will be different. So, but the languages are to a large degree mutually intelligible. In fact, the shared history means that a lot of like shared music and TV and film and all that has incorporated all variations of these languages, and so they have existed side by side for many years, and so people who speak them tend to understand the others. So yeah, I think I get those Slovak young people. It's me. I have a hard time understanding Italian. I personally prefer to learn Italian watching movies with subtitles. Yeah, I mean, I think you've got to go for what you want to go for and what works for you. For Vladimir, it might be the same. He's a man of a certain age now. Yeah, I think this is a thing that, you know, when it, depending on the generation you're from, you're going to see these things slightly differently. Moving and updating with time is sometimes challenging, but yeah, I mean, look, Vlad as well. Vlad is a Slovak speaker, and he studied in Czech Republic. He studied in Prague, so for him, it's like he speaks Czech and Slovak. So his generation is, and he is different to like the new generations of Slovakia. So again, we can't always talk on behalf of a new generation and how countries move, how they move forward. I was very lucky to find a rather experienced book on Serbo-Croatian, but they are becoming rare. Yeah, I mean, because look, Serbo-Croat was the language of Serbo-Croat or Croato-Serbian. That was the language that was fused together to have a standardized form for use in Yugoslavia as a lingua franca. And so to understand that, you know, we're talking about standardized forms of languages. Okay, so whenever you get a dialectal continuum, we're not talking about they take one way of speaking. They would often try and fuse some together, often the ones that held power, and they'd fuse them together to make them a standardized language that people would speak, and then would be used as a medium of education and news and all that kind of stuff. And this is what goes on the world over. But the reality is that these are all language variations throughout that you can follow all the way through all of the Slavic groups. That there is no necessarily one right or wrong way of speaking. It's just that we measure them against the standardized form that was chosen by people in power and the people who made those decisions, whether it was culturally, whether it was politically, whether it was financially, however they were in power. There was an agreement on how these languages were standardized, and that wasn't necessarily always arbitrary, and it wasn't necessarily agreed upon and voted on by everyone. It may have been voted on by some people in some cases, but not necessarily by everyone. And what became the language of prestige and what became the less favorable variations is something that then is sort of a historical fact in terms of with these languages. So, you know, with English, for example, the same thing happened. We have the standardized form of English in the United Kingdom. We then have another standardized form of English in other parts of the world, like the US or Canada, or Scotland has its own standardized English. And then also Australia or India or wherever else. There are so many of them. But what does that mean then for the other variations of that language, the variants, the language dialects, if you will? Because when it comes down to it, they're all dialects. It's just one is chosen as the standardized or is an amalgamation of dialects to become a standardized version. So yeah, this is kind of the tough thing. So when it comes to finding a book on a fused language that was a standardized form for a country that no longer exists because it's broken apart, without any judgment on any of the events and you know how people felt, because again, I'm doing my best to take the feeling out of it, just as a pure linguistic language exercise here. Books on this Serbo-Croatian or Croato-Serbian are no longer produced in the same way, and that's because as a standardized form, it is no longer used. It is now replaced. It's now been replaced by Serbian in Serbia, Croatian in Croatia, Bosnian, or this is more complicated, and then also Montenegrin now in Montenegro. So these are all things that have happened, and so we can't undo these in the same way as, for example, I don't know, and pretending that it still exists and speaking it would be like somebody teaching you how to speak BBC English from the 1950s, and then you go to the UK and you start speaking in a very, very strange way, and nobody really knows why you're speaking in that bizarre fashion, but you are, and it just sounds a bit strange. So as will these standardized forms also become strange. I remember learning old German words from an old German book that taught me the word for lift as Fahrstuhl, and no one uses. Was it Fahrstuhl or Fernsprecher? Nee, that was actually Fernsprecher for telephone. On I think Fahrstuhl as well, lift. Even things move on, right? So you teach the words that people use. I think I'm very much of the language is what the people speak. The language is not what the people don't speak. And there'll be people who are language purists, and there'll be people who are not. I tend more to the look. We need some sort of standardized form for education purposes, I guess, to do certain things, to have an agreed upon understanding that is noted and written down, and that's what standardized forms do. At the same time, these also change. So, I don't speak the way people spoke in previous generations, and my child won't speak in the same way that I speak now, and any children in the future will also speak differently. So these generations, past and present and future, they'll all speak in their own way, and the language continues to evolve. My English is not the English of my parents or grandparents, and it won't be the English of the future generations either. It's just one step in this very long line of English changing and other languages changing. Yeah, I like these questions. I get a bit philosophical. I give cookies and I took it, I realized more and more that most of the language should be done outside the lesson. How do you see the role of a teacher in learning languages? The role of a teacher is to guide, I think, and to listen to the student, what they want and what they need, and to set expectations and to help them realize what the expectations are. But then also to be a repository for the language, to be a safe space to get things wrong, to allow space to talk, and to really get to learn what it is. Sometimes a teacher is also needed to set more of a structure, because a lot of people still look for a really set structure, because our education system has put that in us, and we look to move from one level to the next, the next, the next, the next, the next. Also setting boundaries, so not going down the rabbit holes of vocabulary learning where a student will say, and what's the word for this, and what's the word for that, and what's the word for... No, you don't need all of these words. If you're asking for them all and they're all really random, which words are important to you? What do you actually need to know? What do you actually like, dislike? What you're allergic to? What, those kinds of things are really important ones. But learning every single word because it's there, you'd be there forever, and you'd never do it because you make it an insurmountable task to try and learn all those words. So yeah, as a teacher, your role unfortunately is very varied, and it would depend a lot on the student that you have. I think it's best to take one lesson a week. Yeah, I think that actually my minimum is 2 lessons a week, active lessons usually. I don't feel I make the same progress with 1 lesson a week. I just feel that I tread water too much. Whereas if I do it at least twice a week, I feel that there's enough time in between for me to not forget everything. That's me. Some people might do better, but that's me. Too many classes and you burn out. That's absolutely, yeah. Because if you do too many, JR, you're right. If you do too many classes, you'd often end up just yeah, just trying to sort of overdo it, and you wouldn't have time to really take on what you're doing and to internalize it. Thanks for your help, Richard. I come from Peru, and I live in Rotterdam. Okay, cool. In Spanish, English, German, French, Italian, Russian, and Dutch. Okay, so if you speak Russian, then you're going to have an easier time with all of these as well. Yeah, Slovak and Norwegian. Cool. Yeah, so you'll have an easier time with it. As someone who took lessons in Italki, you're right. With high level of Norwegian, can I understand Swedish, right? Yeah, you should be able to. Norwegian and Swedish are mutually intelligible to a very high degree. So yeah. Yeah, yeah, Svetlana's right. They are different. I mean, the thing is, right, with languages that have a degree of mutual intelligibility, like Swedish, Norwegian, like Slovak, Czech, Macedonian, Bulgarian, these are languages that have standardized forms within their countries and within their communities. So they are different, and they have differently agreed groups of language communities that adhere to the standardized form as their standardized form of a way of speaking that is a lingua franca for those communities. And what tends to happen is when you, for example, if you have a situation, let's take Norway and Sweden because it's a good example and that's most relevant to the question. If you've got a group of Norwegians having a laugh and a joke together and a Swede comes and joins them, they're going to miss a lot of the jokes. They're going to miss a number of things because it will just be too fast and there'll be too many things that are different in the sort of the way they're speaking. Same the other way around. As Norwegians go to Sweden and the Swedes are just talking the Norwegian, unless they're really into and plugged into Swedish, if the first time, right, they're not going to get it. There's going to be a learning curve, and the same thing happens in the other countries I mentioned too. And I've seen this firsthand, and so it's normally the way. But similar things happen with countries where languages are agreed to be. Oh, we're speaking English, for example. Like if you get someone from certain parts of the US and they go to Scotland or somewhere else where they said that they're not speaking Scots, but they're speaking standard Scottish English, again, there will be communication issues because the two standardized languages as well are quite different. So yeah, you get this. A very educational response, Richard. Thank you. It might help those who may secretly been thinking about learning South Slavic languages. Yeah, I hope so. It is quite an interesting thing. I mean, I can say, I've been in situations where I've been with speakers of a language, and then somebody who speaks another language that has a high degree of intellectual, sort of intelligibility. The other speakers are lost for a lot of the jokes and the conversation, the sort of the slang particularly, but also turns of phrase, some grammatical things that slightly different. They may miss things, and so often there's a translation process, a slowing down, a stopping and explaining, and so you can't have this free-flowing conversation. So yeah, I mean, it's a real thing. It's people downplay this and say, "Oh, they're all the same language." Well, standardized languages are exactly that. They are standardized forms, whether it's a dialect that's a prestigious dialect or a group of them that is agreed to be standardized into one form that then the other communities that agree to that standardized form all sort of go into. So it also does, in a way, shape the destinies of the variations of the language, right? Because they will tend more towards the standardized form. And the reason they do that is because it's used in schools, it's used on TV, it's used in songs, it's used in all sorts of places. Whereas the other side of the border will tend towards the other standardized form. So there's kind of a weird, is there a chicken or egg moment, which way around does it go? But this often happens. Let's see. Have you ever seen Ikanos' new Flyer app? Do you know, I saw that he'd had some really good investment into it, and I'm really pleased for him. I've not tried it though. I've just seen the screenshots. That's all, but I've not tried it. Have you tried it? Let's see. Is it better to learn sentences or words? Well, usually sentences, because because you need the grammar as well to hook things onto, so things in context. Sometimes though, that's not always possible. So for example, if you're learning very specific vocabulary, like types of fish, types of birds, types of flowers, types of fruit, vegetables, whatever, sometimes you may just want to learn the words and be able to slot them in. So yeah, you can't always do that. I think it's again, I think it's possibly a bit too difficult to learn everything in a sentence. Learn a sentence to then learn how to swap out the words that are important to you and focus on the words that are important to you, because you love them, hate them, allergic to them, or they're related to people who are close to you, friends, family, pets, whatever. You know, my dog can't eat bananas, for example. I don't know, but whatever it is that's important to you, then those words. Yeah. I'm gonna try releasing. I'm gonna try it if they're releasing the beta version this summer. Yeah, let me know how it goes. I'd be interested to see. I'd be interested in trying it myself at some point as well. Hopefully, my workload will calm down. I'll be able to do that. But until then, unfortunately, I am gonna have to go. I stayed on way longer than I was expecting, but you're also nice, and I enjoy the company and the questions. The questions are always cool, and thank you for being here. Thank you for your support. Thank you for listening to me, interacting with me, asking me questions. I really appreciate it. And again, if you ever want to reach out, please do. And until the next time, I hope that you have a great week, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Hopefully I will be back again very, very soon. I'll do as many of the lives as I possibly can. But at least you're now absolutely in the loop as to why I'm not being as regular as I was before. Anyway, for now, take care. See you soon. Bye, everyone.